Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Scott. I'm Jeff Brodus, and today we're actually joined by our Chief Compliance Officer,
Chris Neidlinger, not Scott.
Scott sends his love from Portugal, so hopefully he'll be joining us next time. But we figured we'd open a conversation and dialogue around the importance of compliance in the financial services world, and who better than our Chief Compliance Officer. So, Chris, why don't we start with just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
So Chris Neidlinger, been with the firm for just about 4 years now. July of 21, I started here. Prior to here, I was also Chief Compliance Officer for another firm in Texas for about 6 years. Long, windy road to get here. I was actually with FINRA, the premier regulator of our industry, for almost 10 years total. Was enforcement most of the time in the Dallas district for a brief amount of time, but really cut my teeth in the industry as a phone representative for T. Rowe Price way back when.
There seems to be a similar vein with everybody starting off in the industry on the phones. So the customer service is runs through our veins here, and there's a lot of the compliance kind of team and customer service that bleeds over into that. Ultimately, your compliance team, you guys provide a high level of service to our reps. But before we get there, help us understand from an overarching perspective a little bit about the importance of compliance and maybe what you guys do on a regular basis.
Sure. So compliance, ultimately we are here to protect the firm and to protect the firm's clients, right? So putting the firm's clients, putting their interest first here. So how do we do that? We have a compliance program in place. The compliance program is designed around federal securities laws and regulations, FINRA rules and regulations, in our case, Texas securities regulations and rules, because we're headquartered in Texas. So we have to manage the program around all the rules and regulations, come up with our own firm policies and procedures to have a reasonably designed system to achieve compliance. Now that, without compliance, a firm can't exist, and without clients, compliance doesn't exist. So it's symbiotic in the sense of, we both need each other. We need reps to generate the business. We need the customers, but we also need, it's the necessary evil of having compliance here to make sure that we stay within the guardrails and within the lines and not to veer outside of that. Being on the other side of this, when I was at FINRA, most importantly in the enforcement division, I saw a lot of firms that would go outside the guidelines and the harm that creates. Not only can you run afoul of customer harm, you have market integrity issues, trade reporting, customer harm being the most important, and then finally reputational risk, right? Once you are on the enforcement radar and you have an action, then it's public record, then you have a reputational issue to deal with. So that's, my job here with our staff is to protect the firm, protect the reputation, protect the customers, make sure that they're getting their interests addressed first, and the firm is profitable and complying with all the applicable rules.
Well, when you talk about protecting the firm and protecting the reps and then the end client kind of first and foremost, help us understand a little bit more about the consequences associated with not having a sound compliance structure.
So the consequences, so we're all subject to, every FINRA member firm is subject to routine exams. So they could be anywhere from an annual cycle to a 4-year cycle, depending on how the firm is risk ranked. We're currently in a 4-year cycle, so we know that every 4 years, at a minimum, FINRA is going to come in, tear up everything, look at our procedures, look at our policies to make sure that, they'll risk-based. We're also subject to the SEC exam. We don't know when the SEC could come in or when they'll come in, but we're also subject to the broker-dealer on that side SEC and FINRA. Now, our affiliated investment advisor is only subject to the SEC's jurisdiction in Texas. FINRA doesn't have jurisdiction over the investment advisor. But with that said, consequences of not complying with the rules can range anywhere from something as minor as a letter of caution that comes from a regulator saying, hey, we noticed these deficiencies or these exceptions, just make sure you get it corrected going forward, to worst case scenario, you have an enforcement action. At the FINRA level, at the SEC level, that could start with customer remediation. There could be disgorgement, there could be fines, there could be time out for individuals who break the rules or don't play by the rules. There could be permanent expulsion from the industry. I guess that's the worst possible case scenario, is expulsion. And I've seen that both sides, right? So I've seen reps, especially when I was at FINRA, they would, one of the areas, they would actually get expelled from the industry for good, so they can never come back into the industry. So that's your ultimate punishment. But, not following the rules day to day, some of the smaller consequences could actually harm the customer, right? You're not following suitability guidelines, you're not documenting rationales or recommendations, and ultimately could hurt the customer, and it could be a mismatch of investments with the customer. And we have these policies, procedures, documents, everything in place to try to guide that within the framework of the regulations to make sure that the customer is in the most appropriate investment and we're serving their needs as desired.
So you talked about suitability. Can you, for the people at home, can you kind of give a high-level overview to what you mean by suitability for the end customer?
Sure. So there are myriad investments out there. You range from a CD, a money market account, to exotic structured notes and registered index linked annuities out there, the latest flavor of the day. So you've thousands and thousands of types of investments out there. So what is a customer? How do you even decide this? So that's the job of the representative. You take the intake, so that suitability profile. You account for the customer's age, their risk tolerance, their time horizon, what their goals are, what their needs are, and where they are at that point in their life. What are they looking for with this bucket of money? Some of it may be appropriate for short term and low volatility. Some they may want to take on that elevated risk level and understanding, say, hey, you may be able to earn, whatever, 10 to 15% return on this investment, but are you willing to take on the volatility of losing some or all of your investment? And it all depends on that nature of that customer, that particular time, and what's recommended for that customer based on the scenario at that time. So that's where really the job of the representative is, to gather all that information, look at the products that we offer on our platform, and come up with the best, the investments that are in the best interest of that customer at the time of the recommendation. And that can change over time. Yeah. So that's where you get into, on the advisory side, you have the ongoing management. You have your annual reviews. You're checking in with the customer. Has anything changed? Do you have a child or a grandchild that you want to save for college for? So maybe there are changes along the way where you bucket out part of the investments to make it suitable for that particular component. And that's where really the rubber hits the road of making sure the customer's in their best investment with us. It's not an easy job to narrow that down. I applaud the reps for doing that, and they have to do it within the confines of the rules and the regulations.
So. It sounds like there's a lot of moving pieces with that. What are some of the biggest challenges that you as Chief Compliance Officer, or by extension, just compliance oversight of your team, contends with on an ongoing basis?
Probably just the scope. We have thousands and thousands of clients, and we have essentially 3 supervisors. So you have to make sure you're using your supervision, your analysis efficiently, because you can't possibly look at every single transaction. You can't look at every email communications. You have to supervise strategically, risk-based supervision. So and it's somewhat of a science, but I think it's more of an art after a while. We have AML obligations. We have to look at all of our transactions, whether they're trade transactions, money movements, and you just think about the nature of the money movements. People that have accounts that use them like checking accounts, you have hundreds and thousands of money movements in and out in one account throughout the year. Again, it's an art to figure out how to strategically and efficiently, but effectively and with confidence, supervise and monitor all those transactions. So I think just the scope of the size of the firm, the amount of transactions that we have, the number of customers we have, and the limited resources that we still have to try to effectively supervise and try to catch anything we can that could be an issue.
It sounds challenging, and I know I can speak for myself and a lot of our reps and probably people watching this online, but definitely a daunting task and something that maybe isn't for everyone. With that, I appreciate you joining us on this latest episode of Coffee with Scott. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.